When my grandfather's funeral turned into a battleground against HOA tyranny, I realized that sometimes rebellion begins with a hearse and a heart full of laughter. Care to join the chaos? The cemetery was filled with the solemn strains of a distant saxophone playing an off-key ode to loss as we gathered to bid farewell to my grandfather. The sun was shining, but all I felt was the cold grip of frustration digging into my ribs like the uninvited elbow of a distant relative. Just as the priest stumbled through an excessively long eulogy about how my grandfather could fix anything except a broken heart, I felt my heart plunge right into my stomach as I caught sight of the grim tableau unfolding just beyond the grave markers. There it was, my proud, midnight blue sedan, my trusty steed in an endless battle against HOA tyranny, hoisted awkwardly onto the back of a tow truck by Janet the Javelin Thompson. I'm sorry, but was I the only one who saw the humor in a funeral complete with a tow truck staging a competing show of absurdity? In that wretched moment, something snapped in me. It was as if the universe yelled, "And we're out of patience." Grief and rage swirled within me like a tumultuous storm, fueled by Janet's gleeful smirk from behind her oversized sunglasses. Because, of course, you can't tow a car without a covert sense of satisfaction. My mind was racing faster than a hot rod on the highway, and a plan began to form. What if I made a point that even Karen Whitfield, our icy HOA president, couldn't ignore? What if I turned their mind, numbing rules, into a spectacle? The absurdity of this moment suddenly flew me into an energizing whirlwind of mischief. After the service and a decidedly unfruitful confrontation with the Javelin, which culminated in me angrily waving my arms like a windmill while trying to explain funeral etiquette to her, I called Eli. He answered with his usual chipper banter, an immediate relief. "What's the emergency? Did you forget your card again?" I filled him in on my tow truck tragedy. "And what do you suggest we do? Call a tow truck for the tow truck?" he chuckled. "Actually, I thought about returning the favor with our own special surprise for the HOA," I said, punctuating my words with exaggerated enthusiasm. If they thought they could trample over my grief with bureaucratic nonsense and pompous hooting, they had another thing coming. Eli laughed, unaware that I'd successfully unleashed the idea to commandeer a hearse as my ultimate counter-protest. The very next day, Eli and I made our way to a local funeral home, which felt like the coolest but strangest heist ever documented. Picture us two 20-somethings casually strolling in, I in my vintage band tee, and Eli rocking a pair of worn-out work boots, asking for what? A hearse for a 3-day weekend. The undertaker raised an eyebrow, likely doubting our credibility, but I flashed my best vulnerable grin. "You see, my grandfather just passed, and I need this to transport my grief. Oh, and perhaps send a message to my just-so-happens-to-be tow truck-loving neighbors." The man's bemused look eased into an amused chuckle as he realized I was serious. This was about more than just a car. It was about dignity, about homeownership rights, and about standing up to those who saw fit to stomp on my laughter in mourning. With pains of laughter in his voice, Eli joined me as we finally secured what I considered my Achilles heel against Karen's tyrannical HOA. Parked on the clubhouse lawn, where children once set up lemonade stands and neighborhood potlucks were held, was a hearse. Not just any hearse. It was a sleek black beauty that sparkled with mischief. That hearse was not just a ride. It was a statement dripping in defiance. Picture the laundry list of solemn expressions on HOA members' faces as they witnessed my resurrection of defiance, a glorange ball of fun flying right into their stuck-up world. We waited for the next HOA meeting, which, for the record, was one of the most unintentionally comedic events I'd ever attended. Karen's meticulously obtained composure unraveled at the sight of the hearse. As she attempted to address me amidst the awkward silence, her face twisted into an incredulous scowl that I thoroughly enjoyed watching morph from confusion into outright outrage. "This is an affront to our community standards," she squeaked. The crowd, the captive audience for my performance art, seemed almost giddy. I felt invigorated, utterly pleased to meet her dramatic vibes with a performance of my own. "Are you saying that mourning in style is against community standards? Because if you've forgotten, that's just plain absurd." The battle lines had been drawn, and they had no idea what they were in for. As Karen made her attempts to banter back with overzealous indignation, deep down in her perfect blonde-locked soul, my moxie kept shining bright. They thought they could keep me silent, but not today. This was war, an absurd, entertaining spectacle that I was determined to win, armed with nothing more than a hearse and a burning desire to reclaim my narrative. After all, who says you can't stage a protest that cuts right to the heart of entitlement, fearlessly marching into the absurd? How theatrically grand could this get? Who would overpower whom? Only one way to find out. The anticipation in the clubhouse was palpable as I stood proudly beside the hearse, ready to unveil a spectacle that would shake the HOA to its very core. Karen's high-pitched indignation echoed in my ears like an annoying mosquito buzzing in the dead of summer. She stammered, "This is completely unacceptable. What will the neighbors think?" Little did she know, the very thing she feared. Public opinion was precisely my trump card. As she tightened her grip on her clipboard, I could almost see the gears turning in that over-calculated mind of hers. Karen, oh, sweet Karen, could you ever fathom the folly that is trying to silence a man with nothing left to lose? It was as if she had stepped into a Shakespearean tragedy, and I was ready for my soliloquy. Eli, who had positioned himself right behind me wearing an obnoxiously large pair of sunglasses and a grin that could have lit up a small city, was the perfect accomplice. "Let her have it, champ," he whispered, stifling laughter and adding a layer of absurdity to the atmosphere as we prepared ourselves for the chaotic drama about to unfold. My heart raced as Karen opened her mouth to speak again, and in that moment, I didn't just feel bold. I felt invincible. "Ladies and gentlemen of the HOA," I boomed, channeling my inner drama queen, "I present to you the manifestation of my grief. A hearse parked in protest against the tyranny of lawn arresters and car thieves. No longer will I mourn quietly, I shall do so with style." The chuckles from the audience were electric, a chorus of disbelief intermingled with glee. It was like pulling back a curtain on a secret carnival hidden within the stifling confines of HOA formality. Karen's perfect composure fractured, and I could have sworn I saw the spark of rebellion ignite in the eyes of some of the neighbors flanking her. "This is ridiculous, Jordan. You're disrespecting the memory of your grandfather," she screeched, injecting her words with more drama than I'd anticipated. I couldn't resist a smirk. Truly, it was a compliment. "Ah, but Karen," I replied, a touch of mockery dancing in my voice, "isn't it disrespecting his memory to sentimentalize rules over love? I'm merely following my granddad's footsteps, who might have towed an inflamed golf cart just for showing up on the wrong lawn." Raucous laughter erupted, the kind that rolled over me like a comforting blanket. I could feel the momentum shift as giggles bubbled up among the audience. Karen was losing them, and her carefully manicured facade was splintering under the pressure. As if summoning the spirit of my grandfather himself, I launched into a tale about how he wouldn't have put up with such absurdity. "We're talking about a man who challenged the city council on the importance of BBQ sauces," I exclaimed, raising my hands dramatically. Now he was a true warrior, and if the man who believed in grilled ribs would have loathed an HOA enforcing puritanical rules about shrub size, the visual of my grandfather wagging his finger at an irate HOA member sent another wave of laughter coursing through the crowd. Oh, how glorious it felt to be turning their tactics back against them. Suddenly, in a wild panic, Karen attempted to regain control. "You can't just park a hearse here. It's against community guidelines. We will have it towed." Ah, yes, my favorite. "To what? To ensure that shoppers for the afterlife have a welcoming parking space? Or are we planning a mass exorcism of homeowners who don't comply? This isn't a funeral. It's a renaissance of reasonable rebellion." At that moment, I truly felt like the reigning champion of absurdity. Eli erupted in laughter behind me and added, "And I hear they got an excellent rates on exercising old grievances, as long as you don't challenge the HOA board." The room fizzled with laughter. It had become a theatrical circus where I had the commanding role. Just then the crowd surged forward, intrigued and emboldened by my defiance. Murmurs began to rip through the audience, a slew of declarations about what they hated about the strict policies that the HOA laid down. Even the last remaining holdouts, who usually expressed their discontent with polite nods, were now leaping from their seats, emboldened to voice their frustrations. "You know, Karen," I shouted, revving up the crowd, "we could use more hearse parking and fewer restrictive bylaws. Who's with me?" The room erupted into a raucous cheer, the kind that barely resembled civilized discourse. It was an uprising against the deserved absurdity of HOA regulations, and at that moment, I realized I was no longer just fighting for myself. I was an unwitting leader of a revolution sparking joy where there had been only drudgery before. But my victory was not yet complete. Karen's face, twisted in a melange of outrage and disbelief, reminded me that her fight was far from over. "You'll pay for this," she hissed, an indignant fire blazing in her perfectly painted blue eyes. "No, Karen," I grinned wider than any Cheshire cat. "Your community just started a collective uprising. If the greatest payment comes from laughter, we are richer than you ever dreamed. This hearse is a new beginning, not merely a protest." Her response was partly a stifled gasp and partly the sound of 1,000 diabolical plots being pondered in that frosty brain of hers. I could tell Karen was already mulling over the retaliation plans that came with being an HOA tyrant, but I was ready for whatever she could throw at me. After all, I had turned her kingdom of pristine rules into a carnival of chaos. What could possibly happen next? The hilarity of my spontaneous rebellion hung thick in the air, but Karen's fiery glare was fixing itself back on me like a spotlight of doom. As the crowd cheered on, I could practically hear the engine of her indignation revving up. If there was one thing I knew about Karen Whitfield, it was that she thrived on control, like a demented puppet master with a clipboard instead of strings. The pursuit of her dubious power had always been an uphill battle against the creeping absurdity of our neighborhood's HOA regulations. And here I was, ready to march right into the lion's den with my ludicrous hearse and audacious spirit. What a glorious day to spit in the face of entitlement, if only for a moment. I decided to shift my vantage point. No longer satisfied with merely basking in the glorious chaos I had created with my hearse, I ramped up the theatrics. This was my moment, an ode to defiance sung louder than any organ music could play. Shouldering my way past the bewildered residents, I mounted up on the roof of the hearse. Yes, literally. I was perched up there like a deranged monarch ready to make proclamations. "Fellow homeowners, inhabitants of this kingdom of overly manicured lawns," I bellowed, gesturing wildly, as if the heavens themselves needed to understand my plight. "Let us cast down the chains of draconian bylaws and pave the way for a new era of do-you whoosh." The words left my mouth and enveloped the crowd in a riot of nodding heads and laughing mouths. It was in that moment of pure, exhilarating mockery that I caught a glimpse of Eli, leaning against the hearse and sporting his oversized shades like a cool breeze breezing through a hot summer day. Only he could look that relaxed amidst such chaos. The guy blended more effectively than a cactus in a candy store, a party-crashing handyman, if you will. He called out, "And it gets better. Did you know the HOA allows flamingo lawn ornaments but not a single beanbag chair? I mean, who are we trying to impress here?" Laughter exploded again, echoing off the clubhouse walls like a joyous wave threatening to sweep Karen away in its riptide. I knew then that my wit had battened down the hatches of her fortress of control, but I wasn't done yet. I needed to go for broke. After all, the best revolutions were rooted in relentless comedy. Karen, looking positively unhinged with her perfect hair starting to fray like an old rug, raised her hand desperately, attempting to re-establish order. "This is intolerable!" she shrieked, her voice cracking like a cheap dish. "If you don't remove this vehicle this instant, I will have no choice but to enforce every last one of our bylaws. Warning, warning, if ever a horror movie had needed a hero, it was now, because I couldn't let that twisted justice flicker out." "Oh, Karen, we both know your bylaws don't have a shred of emotional intelligence attached to them," I retorted, giddy with an overwhelming sense of theatrical rebellion. "Do you enforce a rest-in-peace clause on the sacrilegious display of youth and creativity? Must we cover our lawns in beige to appease your alabaster ideals?" Each word felt like a carefully launched tomato in my satirical protest. Beside me, the crowd started to rally, half of them wielding drinks and snacks while the other half triumphantly hoisted yard decorations. Gasp! That might as well have been the Crimson Wall of Rebellion. "Down with the lawn police," they started to chant, and I felt my heart swell with camaraderie and mischief. Eli winked at me as he dramatically plugged in a speaker, blaring out a majestic rendition of Amazing Grace, much to the delight of those now dancing in the grass like it was Friday night somewhere. Far more liberating proper. Were we really doing this? Were we really embracing the absurdity of mourning for our rights while celebrating life like it was destined for the grandest of raves? I could only laugh as my heart swelled with exhilaration at the thought that our stoic neighborhood was finally shedding its suffocating shell. But the sweet smell of victory wafted in and out, and I realized that not only was Karen at the losing end of the revolution, I had unwittingly become a loony vanguard of homeowners' grievances far beyond my individual plight. My heart echoed with laughter amidst chaotic cheers, but I could feel the temperature of the atmosphere change again, an ominous hum rising from prostrated authority. Karen took a slow, deep breath next to me. It was so palpable, I nearly anticipated her to summon forth a spellbinding comeback. "We aren't done here, Jordan Price," she warned, finger raised like it could repulse the legions of my valiant mischief. "I am well within my right to pursue you on all fronts, even if it means contacting your employer. Even if—" The collective gasp from the crowd was like a flock of startled birds shooting skyward. Oh, the indignity. It was as if she held all the office supplies and a monopoly on passive aggression. "Is that a threat, Karen?" I parried, my brow arching dramatically. I could feel sweat beating along my temple, mounting panic simmering under the delight of dread. Or should I take it as an invitation to unleash even more chaos upon our lawn-loving dystopia? Her eyes flared with disbelief, and I knew I had spurred on a new battle. This wasn't over. Karen's retribution loomed like rain on a sunny day, and I was prepared to stand firm. "To battle!" I declared, rallying the troops as fists readied their resolve in silent defiance. This journey from sad grief to wild rebellion had barely started, and I'd be damned if I didn't take the community along for the exhilarating ride. What was the next chapter in this saga of sheer absurdity? What brilliantly humorous responses would she conjure up against a revolution armed with laughter and a hearse on her lawn? The atmosphere teetered precariously, a bubbling cauldron of energy, laughter, and outrageous tension that felt like a comedy club in the middle of a territorial skirmish. To my left, Karen's face contorted into a mask of indignation, reminiscent of a cat with its tail stepped on. Her finger was still wagging accusatorily, and I swear I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head as she mulled over what sort of HOA-level retaliation she could conjure up. "Jordan, I will not tolerate this mockery of our house rules. This is unacceptable," she fumed, her perfectly manicured eyebrows dancing acrobatically, threatening to leap off her forehead. But there I stood, defiant as a dragon in an enchanted forest, ready to unleash some snickering fire back at her. "Unacceptable?" I echoed, throwing up my hands theatrically in disbelief. "Oh, Karen, the only thing that's unacceptable here is the fact that a perfectly good hearse could be put to better use as a makeshift dance floor instead of this intolerable carousel of rules." The crowd guffawed as Eli, ever the comic relief, jumped down from his spot and roused the dancers with a playful, exaggerated air drum impression, turning the atmosphere into an otherworldly spectacle. As if choreographed by fate itself, the upbeat tunes through the speakers seemed to encourage spontaneous choreography, enticing even the most serious of the neighborhood's folk to sway their non-existent rhythm. Perhaps this dance was our silent protest against the suffocating title of HOA-compliant residents. It felt exhilarating, an undeniable current of rebellion flowing through us as everyone started busting out moves like it was suburbia's first flash mob. But there was an underlying tension amid the laughter. Every chuckle echoed with the fear of repercussions. The mass of homeowners began to swing between thrill and dread, their expressions flickering like candles about to be snuffed out by a gale. Karen's face darkened with fury as she clenched her jaw, and I could almost see her calculating how to regain control like a schoolyard bully whose lunch money had just been stolen. "Just wait until the next meeting, Jordan. I will rally the board, and we will bring this to a vote. I will have my revenge." The ominous overtones of her statement felt too melodramatic, and memories of her spandex-clad campaign videos played like an overly dramatic B-roll in my mind. "Revenge?" I snorted, the ridiculousness of it sending a ripple of giggles through the crowd. "What will you do? Hire the lawn enforcement special forces? Send in your team of flamingo-flying enforcers to hover over our yards with binoculars?" As the crowd burst into pescatarian laughter, yes, I assigned them that title because this was a spectacular seafood bar of a neighborhood, I felt a rush of boldness. "Let's face it, Karen, the only thing more deflating than your threats is your lack of humor. You strut around here acting like you invented neighborhood decorum. But darling, you need to learn how to let loose." This was my moment, my battle cry against the mundane, and I wasn't going to let it fizzle out like a stale punchline. Eli stepped up, undeterred by the formidable presence of our adversary. "I mean, come on. The most fun we get here is lawn mowing competitions, and I guarantee this hearse tops any Best Garden Gnome award you can throw at us." The crowd rallied behind him, descending into a frenzy of approval as Karen's practiced composure crumbled further. The dramatic shifts of her expressions transformed from pure outrage to wide-eyed disbelief, as if she had just discovered the world was flat. "This is ludicrous," she barked, hurling a last grasp at authority like a last-ditch advertisement for the dullness of summer foliage. But the laughter and energy were exhaustive, flourishing above her stony demeanor like wildflowers breaking through cement. But just when it felt like the grand absurdity was about to reach its climax, a small voice piped up from the mouth of a neighbor, someone I'd seen wandering aimlessly in yoga pants and flip-flops the last time I was out for a walk. "We should put up a statue of Jordan right there on the lawn," her friend shouted, laughter erupting like popcorn popping in a hot kettle. "The patron saint of defiance against HOA tyranny." The crowd erupted in raucous enthusiasm, and I felt a swelling of pride wash over me. Little did they know that nestled in my heart was a tender sadness, rooted in grief for my grandfather. He would have laughed at all of this, whispering absurdities about feigned authority and lousy bylaws before urging me to rent a marching band full of snazzy ghosts. In that poignant moment, I saw the irony. The red ribbon at the heart of the hearse was not merely fabric. It was a symbol of the battle between mundane grief and uplifting levity. I couldn't let it be overshadowed. "Good people," I shouted over the din, "while we may be enjoying our defiant shenanigans, let's remember why we're really here. Nobody wants their last ride to take place over the terms and conditions of commune by the trees. No, we should revel in our individuality, just like a hip city bar without a dress code." As the sound of clinking drinks and hearty laughter wrapped around me, I felt the weight of Karen's indignation fading. This surreal confrontation was becoming a wild party, and the heartbeat of rebellion danced now with a sprightly rhythm, echoing my message. We don't want our lives governed by beige decorations and absurd rules. What would happen next in this hilarity of household warfare? Would Karen plot her revenge, or was this the turning point where laughter reigned over our neighborhood? The heat of this delightful chaos simmered as I prepared for whatever our next chapter would bring. As the chaotic revelry continued, I caught sight of Karen's twitching lip and narrowed eyes, a storm brewing in her perfectly coiffed blonde head. It was an exquisite irony, really, watching her attempt to summarily dismiss my audacious theatrics. She looked like a vinyl record stuck on the same line of her unconvincing script, desperate to regain some semblance of control. "This is all just a phase, Jordan," she called out, her voice faltering slightly over the distant waves of laughter. "Once the police arrive, you'll be dragged from that hearse like an unruly juvenile." A few of our neighbors chuckled at her dramatics, but her threat only fueled my fire. My newfound kingdom was built on the very spirits of defiance and camaraderie. "Bravo, Karen. If the police are the ones to solve the mystery of your vacuum-sealed charisma, they're in for quite the shock." Emboldened by the momentum, I glanced around at the crowd amassed before me. I was now not just Jordan, the guy whose car had been unjustly towed during a funeral, but the avenger of awkward HOA bullying. I could visualize my narrative taking a hilariously exaggerated plot twist, with neighbors high-fiving me as I steered their lives away from Karen's matrimonial grip of extreme dullness. "Tonight we dance," I declared, executing a spin that would make a Broadway star weep. The lineup of enthusiastic participants began to swell, and several more neighbors joined our impromptu motley crew, swaying, committing all sorts of delightful dance crimes on Karen's meticulously manicured lawn. Eli, ever the partner in crime, added to the momentum, bobbing around the hearse like an eccentric musician who had just won the lottery. Then, just as the glee reached its euphoric peak, yes, dear readers, right when I thought I could take the neighborhood crown for the dance battle of the ages, the police did indeed arrive. 3 cruisers rolled into the development with flashing lights that mirrored an over-the-top Broadway showbiz production. Silently, I steeled myself, taking in the sight of officers who, I was sure, had been directed straight from the height of deadpan sitcom culture. They emerged from their cars looking slightly bemused, possibly questioning how a hearse had become central to this gloriously absurd showcase of suburban protest. I was convinced they were game for some hilarity. Who wouldn't want to be involved in a communal revolt against HOA tyranny? Feeling the icy grip of uncertainty tugging at my bravado, I approached the police, straightened my posture, and flashed a grin that I hoped bordered on nonchalant. "Gentlemen, welcome to the revolution," I announced with excessive flair, sweeping my arm toward the moving dance floor on the lawn. "Rest assured I am leading an unpermitted funeral procession of freedom." Laughter erupted in waves from the crowd, much to the evident bemusement of the officers. One of them, Officer Mills, offered a wry grin while the others exchanged incredulous glances, wondering if they'd stumbled onto a sitcom or something truly chaotic in real life. "I have to admit," Officer Mills began, adjusting his cap with a characteristic twinkle in his eye, "this isn't quite what we had in mind for community disturbances. Usually it's much more quiet." The air thickened with laughter at the sheer absurdity of the situation. While Karen seethed, glowering like an extra in a low-budget horror film, the officers didn't seem disposed to diffuse the festivity just yet. One even waved his hands in rhythm, as if trying to join the enthusiastic demonstration. I could feel the tides shifting. Maybe the police weren't the furious enforcers of muted decorum we feared. Perhaps they were quietly endorsing our joyous rebellion against the constraints of our HOA. Before I could bask too long in this moment of sheer hilarity, Karen took it upon herself to attempt damage control, striding towards the officers like a peacock in high heels. "Officer, This raucous display is completely against community guidelines. These hooligans should be fined for their outrageous behavior." Each word dripped with indignation, and I swear her body radiated the shockwaves of her misplaced authority. "Hooligans?" I interjected, attempting to keep my jovial attitude intact. "Do we look like hooligans to you? Or are we just your neighborhood's finest defying tyranny with style? I'll even provide a ground arrangement for the after-party right there next to the mailbox." The laughter rose again, mixing like some euphoric cocktail meant for a summer party gone rogue, and my heart fluttered with joy. "Listen, Karen," Officer Mills said with the discretion of someone who had clearly seen his fair share of HOA horror stories, "I think the big issue here is not whether there's a dance party on your lawn, but rather how your community responds to it. You want unity, but it's hard to foster that with stifling authority." As the neighbors erupted into cheers at this unexpected angle, I glimpsed Karen's frosty composure beginning to crack as if someone had hit her with a sledgehammer of public opinion. The scene was to transform from mere ridiculousness to a salutation of togetherness, and in my heart, I dared to wonder, could this truly be the beginning of change? A newfound sense of unity amongst grumpy residents and fun-seeking rebels? Could this wacky dance-off challenge the very foundations of Karen's tyrannical control, laying down a humorous challenge too enticing for us to resist? The cacophony filled me with hope, glimmering like confetti in a beam of sunlight as I stayed rooted in the pure pleasure of the moment. If we could turn an HOA dictatorship into a joyous celebration, who knows what we could inspire next? With that thought sparking wild ideas in my mind, I felt exhilarated for what might come next. What if we took this absurdity to the next level? What absurd challenge was brewing in the back of everyone's mind, just waiting to be unleashed? As the situation unfolded with the excitement of a Super Bowl halftime show, I couldn't help but relish the thought of change in the air. "Can you believe this, folks?" I shouted, gesturing dramatically to the dancers grooving to the imaginary beat of a drum solo heralding freedom. Officer Mills chuckled, almost reluctant to stifle the laughter erupting from the gathered crowd. Their expressions mirrored my glee, a blend of disbelief, amusement, and support. I could feel the wave of camaraderie washing over us, knitting this motley crew into something more significant than mere neighbors. We were a banner of defiance, ready to proclaim our rights, and Karen Whitfield, with her meticulously organized rules, had unknowingly led us to this electrifying moment of rebellion. But there she stood, the poised queen of monotony, her perfectly coiffed hair fluttering in the breeze, lips pursed in a far too famous expression of disdain. She had transformed from a fearsome HOA overlord to the unwitting star of a slapstick comedy, and I couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction at her bewilderment. "Let's have a funeral for your corporate dreamland that suffocates us. How about that, Karen?" I hollered, smirking as the neighbors erupted in laughter, their virus of mirth spreading like an unstoppable Yelp review to deflate her ego. An imaginary wind whipped through the scene, carrying my wish for our community to rise from the ashes of bureaucracy, to dance as if no HOA would ever tow one of our vehicles again through the realms of absurdity. Isn't that the real horror story? While the crowd reveled on, Eli decided to crank up the chaos. He had brought with him a portable speaker, not fancy by any means, but more than sufficient for his dance-off DJ debut. "And now, ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "let's turn this funeral into a disco, a funeral where everyone's invited. We are here to have a ball." He pressed play, and a blast of that infectious 90s dance anthem filled the air, leading us to twist and shout merrily. Suddenly, the lawn transformed into a swirling mass of rhythm and giggles as neighbors shed their inhibitions and allowed joy to take over. The desperate desire to challenge our HOA's supremacy was palpable. "It's like Vatican City's acceptance of breakdancing," I thought gleefully. Just then, like the Grim Reaper of rules making a surprise cameo on an increasingly theatrical stage, Karen's voice sliced through the cheerful atmosphere. "Enough! Your childish behavior will have consequences," she screeched, aiming to draw the officers' attention back toward the fine print of their sacred bylaws. But herein lay my miscalculation. Our merry band was not in the mood for reprimands. Instead, we doubled our efforts, boldening our delight while simultaneously ignoring her pleas, like she was merely a misplaced lamppost in our midst. I decided it was time to rally the troops. "Neighbors!" I bellowed, my bravado ignited by those polished high heels. "Why should we be a silent choir for complaints? Today, we're the raucous rebellion of joy. Are we not entitled to celebrate life despite, or perhaps even in defiance of, her tyrannical rule?" My challenge hung in the air like the sweet scent of fried funnel cakes wafting through a county fair. The laughter of my fellow rebels resonated across the lawn like a melody from the gods of joy. Let's make some noise, good people. With that, I led a chant of solidarity that echoed out into the early evening like a triumphant battle cry. No more tyranny, no more towing, fun is our right. As we carried on, I spied Officer Mills exchanging knowing glances with his fellow officers. Their reluctant smiles were a chord struck, indicating they're siding more with laughter than authority. By this point, even the glimmers of pastel chaos on Karen's face suggested her previous control was flying right out the window. What she had deemed a nuisance was becoming an irresistible force of unity against the tides of rigidity. Watching her demeanor, I couldn't resist wading even deeper into the theatricality. I turned to the crowd with a flourish. Clearly, we've awakened the wrath of our neighborhood overlord. My audience erupted in grins, and for a moment we were not bored suburbanites beaten down by violations and dues, but a chorus of revivalists, the absurd champions of laughter and rebellion. Let's show her just how vibrant our community can be, I yelled, whirling around to lead an infectious conga line that spiraled chaotically but joyously across the lawn, pulling more reluctant but curious souls into our throng as our disdain morphed into cohesive defiance. How delightful to see once timid residents throw their arms around each other, grinning from ear to ear, discovering their own liberation within silliness. As the outrageousness reached an incredible zenith, the police officers, fueled by the joy radiating from our makeshift dance floor, decided to join in, dancing about the edges, their laughter mingling with our cheers. Incredible, right? They hadn't come to quell a disturbance. They had stepped into the enchantment of community spirit, perhaps triggered by the audacity of a single stubborn resident enduring an HOA's tyranny. Looking sideways, I caught a glimpse of Karen thrusting her hands in despair, frosty fury radiating from her like a firefly haphazardly tangled in Christmas lights. I felt a spurt of exhilaration at the thought that this celebration would likely infuriate her beyond comprehension. As I danced under the fading glow of twilight, I began to reflect on the chaotic beauty of the moment. A small, bustling group of neighbors unified under the banner of absurdity, forcing even the stony Karen to bear witness to our joyous rebellion. Could it be that this delightfully anarchic dance party was the first crack in the frostiness of her reign, revealing the rich undercurrent of camaraderie that an HOA couldn't suffocate? A thrill coursed through me, filled with the hope of long-lasting change, and deep in my heart, I wondered if this spontaneous act could topple the tyrant and replace her rigidity with a new mantra: in unity, there's laughter. In laughter, there's joy. Maybe, just maybe, we would take our fates into our own hands and embrace a far more hilarious future instead. Would it?